Hello. Hello. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. First, let me start by saying we have closed captioning today. You can access captions by pressing the CC toward the bottom of your screen. I'll give you a moment to do so. And I'd like to thank our closed captioners for being with us here today. Great. Well, hello, everyone. I am Lisa Coleman, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Global Inclusion and Strategic Innovation here at NYU, and I use she and her pronouns. Thank you again for joining us for today's NYU Be Together Global Scholars and Innovators conversation with Anna Mock. We are thrilled to have this program today. Today we will be taking questions and answers, and you can use the Q&A feature, which is also located at the bottom of the screen. And we will be grouping questions in the interest of time in order to answer as many as possible. But you are more than welcome to submit your questions all along the way. And we will get back to those as we go and when we come to the Q&A period during the latter part of this conversation. As always, I must begin by thanking my amazing team in the Office of Global Inclusion, Diversity, and Strategic Innovation here at NYU. Thank you to everyone on the team. There are quite a few people here today working behind the scenes. So thank you to everyone who's on the call right now. And of course, to the entire team, of which there are quite a few. And I should just give a special shout out to Tara for all of her work in making sure that the advertisements, et cetera, and that's Tara Nakata. So thank you, Tara, for all of your work. And thank you, of course, to the entire team behind the scenes for everything. Um, as we enter the final stretch of the academic year, I continue to be just in awe of the work that we've been able to do. And it's only because of the team that we've been able to do this work. So thank you. I'd also like to thank Anna's team. Thank you for your support and working with my team, to Shanghai and our partners in Shanghai for their support, and to, of course, the NYU Women's Leadership Forum for co-sponsoring this event and for their work on leadership across the university. Now, let me go on a little bit further to say, I hope always everyone is just taking good care. People keep saying this is a new normal. It is not normal at all. There's immense stress. There's serious illness. There are health issues. There's increased home care for others and for self and for colleagues, and so much more. I've been saying that what we need is a new different that recognizes the disparate impacts, the urgency of now instead of rhetoric, the disparate impacts on people of Asian descent, people of African descent, women, people with disabilities, who are indigenous, all of the people who have had disparate impact, and we know from the research, and we'll be talking about some of that today. We must move toward transformation and emphasize equity and action. As an NYU community, we continue to recognize the scope of the impact during this pandemic and continue to prioritize our support and work with individuals so that they are able to support their families and collective health and well-being during these unprecedented times. I would also like to acknowledge all of the frontline workers. Thank you for everything that you're doing out there. To all of our healthcare workers, thank you. The behind the scenes laborers, whose labor is often unseen and undervalued, who continue to sacrifice for our well-being, including those who clean and care and maintain our hospitals and facilities, public transportation, and of course, delivery services. All of those essential workers out there who care for us and allow us to care for ourselves. Thank you. We know that we could not simply be without you. I want to remind the NYU community members to continue to visit the NYU Returns COVID information site, where you can access additional information about NYU's latest plans and resources available to community members. As we know, a lot has already happened this year. We entered 2021 with a racist insurrection at the US Capitol and ongoing national and global dissension. There's a continued surge in anti-racism directed toward people of Asian descent, violence in New York City directed toward people of Asian descent, and nationally and globally. We've also seen continued anti-Black racism and violence in the continuation. We've seen, as I just mentioned, the disparate impact on women, particularly women losing their jobs. And of course, we know about the things that we've read in the Wall Street Journal and the disparate impact, particularly on women in higher education as it pertains to research. And as I also mentioned, many other communities, Latinx communities, people with disabilities, etc. COVID-19 has drastically reconfigured our lives with continued disproportionate impacts among marginalized communities. And as history reminds us, ethnic bias, xenophobia, and racism are often magnified during times of health and economic crises. We only need to think back to SARS or the MERS outbreaks, which were also unfortunate recent examples, and of course, the AIDS pandemic. The differential impact of disease continues and aligns with patterns of disenfranchisement, stereotyping, ethnic biases, marginalization, racism, xenophobia, nationalist impulses that disproportionately affect some communities more than others. It remains critically important for us to continually focus our attention on holding ourselves and others accountable to address the aforementioned and the continual disparities that are impacting so many. We must continue to work together to build communities and collective efforts to take action. We hope that this evening's program, hosted by NYU and the Office of Global Inclusion, provides some additional frameworks and opportunities for learning and engagement to support you in your action to make NYU more inclusive and beyond. Now, before we dive deeper into today's programs, I'd just like to take a moment to honor those who've come before us, our ancestors. The lives that we've lost, those known to us and those unknown. I'd also like to recognize the indigenous peoples upon whose lands we now occupy. And we must also recognize, firmly repudiate, and condemn the ongoing crises of anti-Asian and anti-Black violence in the United States, rooted in histories and present day oppression, persecution, systemic discrimination. Might we take a pause, a moment of silence to reflect and honor our ancestors, honor those lives that have been lost, and the indigenous lands upon we sit. Thank you for this moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you again for joining us for today's NYU Be Together Global Scholars and Innovators series conversation with the transformational leader, Anna Mock, co-sponsored by, as I mentioned before, NYU Women's Leadership Forum. The Global Scholars and Innovators series, along with the rest of NYU Be Together efforts, are centered on innovation, action, and transformation together. We hope that you will follow us in the Office of Global Inclusion for more updates, events, programs, and resources that will allow you to join in on our efforts to advance diversity, equity, and inclusive excellence here globally and across our global campuses. During tonight's conversation, we will focus on transformational leadership, and we hope to learn more, of course, about Anna's leadership journey, thoughts on transformational leadership, leading with equity, and the importance, of course, of innovation. In our conversations, we will also address systemic and systematic, anti-Asian racism and violence that continues to plague the United States and beyond. Now, while we are all here, I am so pleased, happy, thrilled to introduce Anna Mock. Anna Mock is the president and co-founder of Ascend, North America's membership network of Pan-Asian businesses, professionals, and the co-founder of Ascend Pinnacle, North America's network of Pan-Asian corporate directors. Known as a community builder and connector, Anna has a deep passion for creating economic and educational access for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace and society. She inspires her team and organizations to make positive, sustained societal impacts and is focused on building leaders to do so. She has demonstrated commitments to the development and advancement of emerging leaders, women, and members of underrepresented groups into senior executive and corporate board director roles. Her impact extends beyond the AAPI community with other boards she currently serves on, including the 117-year-old Commonwealth Club of California, the nation's largest and oldest public affairs forum, where she was the first Chinese female chairman of, and at the United Way Bay Area, where she recently served as the first chairperson of Asian descent. We know a little bit about firsts here, Anna, so maybe we'll get back to that too. And is also currently the nominating and governance chair of the Committee of 100 and a senior fellow with the American Leadership Forum. During her distinguished career at Deloitte, she has served in various leadership roles, including ones focused on clients and market growth. She is a broad-based leader focusing on serving prestigious companies headquartered across the globe in high technology, healthcare, life sciences, fintech, and consumer-oriented industries. She is currently the Asia Pacific leader for the advisory practice, and a global lead client services partner at Deloitte. Anna was the first Chinese American woman admitted to partnership at Deloitte, selected as a member of Deloitte's board council and the CEO Advisory Partner Council. An immensely curious and creative individual, and we love curiosity here. Anna spends her time building public art, pursuing her love of cooking. We have that in common. I love to cook, big gardener. Renovating her Victorian home. We can always talk about interior design, and exploring nature with her family and friends. And on a personal note, I would just like to say that having worked with Anna with the organization of Ascend, she is just an amazing leader that is able to collaborate and bring great minds together, great minds to take action and do really meaningful and impactful things. And I have been a pleasure to be a part of and participate in some of the organization's activities. So thank you for joining us here today, Anna, and we are just thrilled to have you.
Thank you, Lisa, and your team. Now you've set such high expectations. I hope I don't disappoint in this next hour. It's always such a pleasure, Lisa, to share the stage with you. We've done this in different forums, and I'm so glad to be your guest today. And just your opening words gave me chills. And I think it gave me chills because of the way you framed where we are today, but also being able to frame it with so much heart and soul. I think that's why we're friends, because we share that in common. Sometimes we forget in our work, this is about people and about how we come together. And so the work you and your team and NYU is doing is so critical to a broader global understanding of where we are today as a society and as fellow human beings. So just thank you for framing that so well and kicking us off into really a chance to discuss our shared passions, not only around our homes and cooking and other things, but really around what I believe is both of our life's work.
That's right.
As it relates to the topic at hand. So thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your generous words. So let's just get started. So as you may know, here at NYU, we're known to have an entrepreneurial spirit and commitment to innovation. It's sort of all over the place. We're the largest private institution, the most global, and we're the university with the highest percentage of funded companies led by a female founder. We're also the top university for actually students putting their businesses together and coming out of the institution with businesses intact. We outpace even institutions like MIT. So in the audience today, we certainly have some future business leaders, many of whom are women or members of historically marginalized communities. Could you tell us a little bit about your career journey, some of the pivotal moments and the trajectory that you could share perhaps with our students and other members, and share even maybe some of the hiccups along the way. Sometimes, some of our students think that we got here, we closed our eyes and magically became leaders. So you could share with
Exactly. Well, I have so much high regard for NYU, not because they were brilliant to have you as part of the team, But NYU actually, with both Deloitte and Ascend, has a very close relationship. Many of my colleagues at Deloitte are from NYU, but also our Ascend staff is comprised of interns, so students from NYU, and many of our members, because we are New York headquartered, but also in all the other places that you have campuses, are actually NYU alum. So very familiar, and again, respect the work. So my career journey and, all those first came over the course of, I would say, the 3 decades of work I've had since I graduated college. And like you said, I think sometimes people believe our career journeys are so well planned. And I would say mine is not one that was well planned at all. Contrary to being able to have made impact and fortunate enough to have a chance to make impact throughout my career, this was not a planned journey that I have on where I am today. I started my career right out of college from University of California, Berkeley. And my unfortunately, I couldn't at that time afford to go cross country to be in New York. My mom was ill with breast cancer when I was in high school. And so I had to stay really close to home. And it was really UC Berkeley as a public institution that I really had the privilege to attend at that stage in life. And so that set me off on really this exposure to what the bigger world would be. I'm a San Francisco, my family immigrated to the Bay Area when I was a baby. So I grew up on the West Coast here in San Francisco, where I recently moved back to into this beautiful Victorian that needs a lot of work. Um, and then I joined Deloitte, frankly, not really even realizing what that meant. My real ambition was to be a psychiatrist, but I decided med school was not for me. And that was way too long of an educational path for me to ever become a psychiatrist. So I did the next big thing. I went to and joined at that time the Big Eight, where the chance to work with such a wide range of people and businesses seemed very appealing to me. And I had a very classical start. I started in our audit practice. I learned the ropes. I honed in on my professional skills and was a CPA. And so accounting finance is what I studied. And kind of through the course of that, I learned more and more about business and was fascinated by my clients and all the different industries that they're in. And that led me to do a lot of different things, including explore beyond my own technical abilities, what was most interesting to me. And what I found what really made me excited was the ability to work with a wide range of people from a range of backgrounds and learn from them and learn from each other. So that led me on a path when it was time to become a partner to extend beyond the audit group. And I had an opportunity to be in a startup practice at that time that really was focused on building and expanding our client portfolio. So I went from being part of the biggest part of the firm to this little tiny group that like had a handful of us that really wanted to do something different to grow the firm. So I had this opportunity with some mentorship to try that and do that. So I felt I had a chance to really start a business in the context of a larger organization. So I would say that was one of the big inflection points for my career in terms of being able to get out of my comfort zone, frankly, get out of just working on one or two clients and work on a lot of them. And along the way, I think I've taken that same concept and I've moved around our businesses quite a bit. I've traveled around the world with the company, over 50 countries now, although I kind of took a pause this last year from traveling because of COVID. So I'm waiting to add more countries to that
I think we all
and
had to
work
do a little bit of that.
all of that and work with a lot of global clients, but also I had a chance to do things like become the CDO for one of our businesses early on in my career and do that in addition to serving clients. So I think my career journey represents a chance of really taking advantage of opportunities that come our way, even though they were unknown, even though I don't know if I had the skill set for and exploring. And that's led me to 15 years ago start Ascend as one of the co-founders. And how Ascend started was 15 years ago, there were already, even decades before that, a lot of Asian Americans graduating from top universities like NYU. But a bunch of us looked around our companies and said, why is it that a few decades ago we were already graduating so many people, but why were they not getting to the most senior ranks of the companies? Even though I know we were all smart, we all graduated with all the right credentials, but somehow we were not advancing at the same pace. And especially women and women of color were advancing even more startlingly slower. So that's what led to Ascend, and that's what led to this body of work the last decade and a half that has given me so much meaning. And I think that's really back to what I said about you and I having common purpose. I think being able to find our way and integrating meaning into our day-to-day professional work that helps us pay the bills, but also being able to show purpose and impact is so important.
I think that's so important. And I think far too often, sometimes as we're providing career advice, we don't always focus on the purpose and passion components, right? And that can lead us, as you've demonstrated, through some circuitous paths, right? Circuitous going around, but nonetheless learning. And I think that's so key along the way. And I think what you emphasized in terms of, I love this idea of the little, moving from the sort of little, the big group to the little group, and moving into a startup. One of the things that we do try to emphasize also with organizations, so I'm so glad to hear you say that, is intrapreneurship, right? Especially for the new generations. And a lot of our students are interested in that. So I'm sure they were interested in hearing you say that. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. All right, so let's go back to some of our questions. So if we think about, like I was said, your journey, and if we are to, sorry, I lost my place here. I want to make sure I don't ask some questions that are my own questions. So one of the things that you said was, you've been in a lot of circles, right? And you've built communities, even as you described your background, right? Even with Ascend and then moving to the smaller group, right? Really thinking about how you made connections. And I would add, right, that you're a transformational leader, because I know a little bit about you, who operates as with an unwavering commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What would you say are some of the issues of economic and why would you say these issues, excuse me, of economic and educational access have been so important to you over the course of your career? Right? You sort of kind of gestured toward that. But tell us a little bit about why and why it's remained so important, right? I mean, you could have moved on, done other things.
Yeah, for sure. And this work is hard work, right? We
Yeah,
talk
you
about
could burn out. There
vision.
are all kinds of things, right? So tell us a
Yeah,
little bit about that. Yeah.
it's not easy work. And it's interesting how I came to even hone in on economic and educational access was about actually about 10 years ago when I was refreshing my own resume and really looking from within of what I was about. And I look back on my body of work and what really excited me. I had realized that my work in starting Ascend, in being involved in a place like United Way and being a donor and looking at addressing poverty as part of that work, or the work that I did with the Commonwealth Club, which was about education and bringing right all views to the table, that was the commonality in where I was spending my free time, right? My extra time outside of raising a family and again working at Deloitte. And then I realized, kind of when I paused to think about it, what's the most impactful thing I can do as a corporate leader? And that is creating access, right? That access comes in many forms, as you know. That access may come in the form of me directly fundraising and kind of passing the hat to friends and colleagues and community to support causes. That access may come to just enlightenment. So much of the work, frankly, that many of us have been doing the last couple of years, but especially COVID, as you mentioned around the disproportionate impact of COVID on marginalized community, has been actually raising awareness and educating, right? Without that baseline understanding and without a baseline ability to earn a living, and advance, we don't go anywhere, right? It doesn't matter what it is, but if we don't satisfy those basic needs people have as humans, we will not be able to evolve. And that is why I feel that's so important. And while there may be perceptions of, say, organizations like Ascend, or even frankly, students like NYU, because I know how much your tuition is. I have my own daughter in college that's going to a private university. People may perceive us as having privilege, right? And these organizations of people of privilege, I've really tried to shift the conversation with our members and my own circle of network to say, what are we going to do with our privilege? The fact that actually we're able to get a university degree is a privilege in itself. Even if I have to get that via scholarships and working every day, as another job, those are still privileges. So I really believe in using that privilege for the purpose of economic and educational access, because by that it will fuel itself, right? Once someone is can get to that place of self-empowerment, they will then create greater good for the community.
I that is just so perfectly said. Access. I can't I mean it's so important. So thank you for sharing that. And you are right about transforming a community, right? So, and this leads me directly into the next question I want to ask, which is your leadership has been transformational, and right now what we need is transformation. And I've been saying this a lot in some of my lectures because in South Africa they call chief diversity officers chief transformation officers, and after the post-apartheid moment. And so I think about that moment, right, and particularly in these turbulent times, and what chief diversity officers are doing, and then the people who are doing the work, the leaders like yourself, right? And these have also been really painful times. We know, for example, that there's continued uh, violence directed toward people of Asian descent. There's the perpetual foreignness that continues, right,
Mhm.
historically throughout the United States, certainly. And it's rooted in legacies of racism, discrimination. Um, and some organizations have been tracking this, and organizations such as AAPI have reported a nearly 150% increase in violence directed toward people of Asian descent in 1 year alone. So could you talk to us a little bit about what do you think organizations such as Ascend, and maybe even NYU can do to uh, advanced diversity, equity, inclusion? You've talked a little bit about it, a little bit in terms of thinking about education, but maybe you could expand a little bit more about the work that we need to do, not just individually, but also collectively, right? Cross sector as well.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a few things. One, and I use this term, we have to appreciate that what happens in our streets is completely interlinked to what happens in our institutions, and those institutions being academic institutions, corporate institutions. It is easy for us to completely decouple that, right? We want to believe that if there's a hate crime against an API in the streets of San Francisco, that is an isolated, some crazy person did that. Someone that is racist did that. Or the shootings, right, that are related to what we saw last year and George Floyd's death are just segmented. But the reality is the things that led to those acts of violence and acts of hate have deep roots in us as a society, in our values, and in history. So I think there is such a basic piece of work to be done around educating all of ourselves and each other around the history. And it is our history, whether we like it or not. We will not rewrite it, but all we can do is move it forward, right? So I'm not a big believer in rewriting and changing history. Each of us, it's part of our American journey that led us to today. And there's a lot of good stuff in that American journey or global journey, but there's some things that we should not accept as we move forward as fellow humans. So that education is a piece of it. The other piece, I think, and I'm seeing this because I've spent a lot of time in this last year, but in particular since the Atlanta shootings, right? Talking to companies, talking to their employees, speaking with executives. And we tend to see these as separate communities. So what's happening to Asians is something just happening to Asians right now. I use the phrase, when someone or when society is attacking seniors. So my father is an 88-year-old elderly that lives by himself in San Francisco, which is why I moved back to the city to be closer to him. When he cannot go out anymore, even though he's fully vaccinated now for weeks, that is actually an issue that is not about Asians. It's actually a societal issue that we have to reflect and look from within of what that means. And I do believe each of us have a part to play in that. I don't think, and I know the community participating in this are students and your alumni. I don't think you need to have a big title. You don't need to have a big role. You don't need to be as old as I am or Lisa or, have had decades of work to make change and transformation, right? I want us all to feel like we can make that change. And the change may be as simple as if we see something that doesn't sit right, that we just redirect the conversation, that we call it and we stand up for each other if it doesn't feel right. Because I think most of us know what's right and what's wrong. We don't need a book to tell us that. We know that, right? What's right and what's wrong.
And I think that's so important because so many times we think it has to be this big momentous thing that we do, right, to change something. And it can just be those small acts of accountability, small acts of redirection. So that's really great. And you started, and I just want to just say that again. I couldn't. I think that the links that we have to begin to make between what's happening in the streets and what's happening in our institutions, and far too often we don't do enough of that. And it is about people, which is what you talked about earlier, right? People make up our institutions and our organizations, and we know that if we care for the people in our organizations, we're going to have better organizations. So absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And I think and we might get into this whole model minority myth, which I've spent a lot of time talking about, which hopefully some of the viewers are starting to get educated on, is such a complex issue for the Asian American community. Even within the community ourselves, we haven't figured out if we, under appreciating it's a myth and it's actually harmful to us as a community.
Right. Even positive, quote unquote, negative, positive, those stereotypes, right, put people in boxes in certain ways. And then how do you move, right, and put groups in boxes, etc. So actually, my next question is going to delve a little bit into that idea, because I want to talk a little bit about the model minority and about gender. Because, and you brought this up earlier. So this year we celebrated not just we in the United States, celebrated the 19th Amendment. And here at NYU, what we did was we focused on the women who were excluded. We've had a lot of programs focusing on all the women who couldn't vote. And we know, right? I mean, we know there were a lot. We were just, we had exclusion acts, we had differential voting, we had all kinds of things happening during that time. So at NYU, we're springboarding into new efforts that will focus on leadership and some of the persisting issues for women. Could you talk to us a little bit about the intersectional issues, right? Because sometimes when we say women, people don't, women of color, women with disabilities, but in particular, women of Asian descent. And to go back to what you talked about, this notion of the model minority and the perpetual foreigner, right? How those sort of work together sometimes, and then how they work to box people in, and in particular, the ways that works differently for women and men.
This again showing the complexity, right? The model minority myth is something that even many Asians are quite comfortable with. Who doesn't want to be considered hardworking? Who doesn't want to say, yes, we're very successful? Yet I think that also carries a burden, right? That means I should be happy with what I have right now at work. I should never complain because I got into X, right? And I should be doing really well. So it also creates an environment where Asian Americans at large, but also women with the double pressure of women and, all the stereotypes around women, it just makes it even harder, right? It makes it harder for us to ask for the promotion, to assert ourselves, to ask for the raise, or to say, that just doesn't, no, that wasn't fair for me.
Mhm.
We've had Ascend does a lot of research, as you know, right, across the level, especially for the executives and boardroom. In our research, it's shown that actually Asian American women are 3 times less likely to get into the executive suites than the white male. In when we look at it in aggregate, I think that's a little known fact, right? And sometimes we miss. We look at these issues because there's a lot of Asian Americans in the workforce, which is great, right? Where we're in a high, relative to our general population, there's actually multiples of that in the professional workforce. People assume, well, so many people are working already, must not be a problem, or the junior levels of companies have a lot of Asian Americans. But if you look at women, so the double glass ceiling, as I would call it, and if you add intersectionality of another dimension, whether disabled or LGBTQ on that, it's a triple glass ceiling that that a woman of color and an Asian woman feels. That's pretty intense, right? In terms of us being able to transcend that, and us being quite mindful of that is really important. I try to have us feel not that it's a burden, even though I used that word earlier, but there's an opportunity, right? There's an opportunity for us because if I can break that glass, or you and I can do that, we're breaking 3 glasses at once, hopefully, versus one at a time. But it definitely is a pretty thick triple pane glass here when you add intersectionality components to what I may just experience either as a woman or as an Asian by itself.
That's absolutely right. 3 panes of glass, sometimes 4 or 5, depending on who you are. That's right.
Yeah,
Thank you,
I
Jay.
still believe it's breakable though. I personally don't love the term bamboo ceiling, even though that's used quite often for Asian Americans, because bamboo is pretty hard to break, whereas
Yeah.
glass is breakable. So I want to believe it's breakable. I have a daughter myself, and I want her to believe that she wants to not only break it, but she can, right,
Yeah.
in her lifetime. Just like
I
I
think
hope
that's
that I
really
can at least make the glass thinner in my lifetime, even if not completely shattering it all.
I think that is actually just terrific. That's exactly right. And I think that it's important to have that because we have shattered some things, right? We have broken through some of the first pains, right? So let's just continue chipping away, as it were, as
Mhm.
especially for the new next generations.
Mhm.
Um, so I want to go back to something that you said a little bit, which was about economic access. And recently, I had Dan Schulman as a NYU graduate and alum. And
Mhm.
as you know, he's the CEO of Pay. I have to say these things because not everyone knows who Dan Schulman is. I know who you know who he is, but he's the president and CEO of PayPal. And he's been quoted as saying, quote, the responsibility of corporations has moved beyond simply delivering shareholder profits. The growing expectation from stakeholders is that companies need to take action to affect positive social and environmental impact, end quote. So I'd like to hear a little bit about your take, and in particular, what you think corporations can do to not only to advance equity and address structural racism, but to go back to what you talked about, economic access, right? The role of corporations in that, as particularly as we think about. As you were just talking about, right, the access issues to leadership for people of Asian descent and women of color, etc.
Yeah, there's definitely much companies can do. In Lisa, you referenced our 5-point action agendas that we started a year ago, right? We started a year ago at the first spike that a recorded spike of anti-Asian hate. And what we decided to do was make it not just about Asians, but really shining light on the disproportionate impact of COVID on many communities, not just the Asian American community. And in that effort, the companies that joined in that effort, we had over 100 companies sign on to make this pledge, which I think the team is already put up the 5-point action agenda. And we have another 50 companies coming on board and more coming on board. So I think companies making a commitment that they are going deeper and understanding these issues and supporting communities. In it, we ask companies to support communities and donate, right? So that aspect can come in many forms. So that's one thing that we've been working with companies on. And I think that work is not a one time piece of work, it will continue on for the coming years. Um, we're no longer at this place where you can separate what I'll call social justice work and leave it to the civil justice organizations. You've seen my work around this front. For example, Ascend is not a traditional social justice organization, nor I believe NYU is. Yet the work we do plays an important role in advancing social justice, right? The work we do can no longer be decoupled from the important work, right, to make change in communities. And so companies looking at what they are doing on how they advance diverse communities, right, and build a more inclusive workplace and challenging themselves to do that is one step. Them looking at their programs of how they support the community at large. But more importantly, you've heard me on this mantra about sustainable change and why I think that part is so important. I think it's very easy when, even for right now, right, with all the hate crimes going on against Asians and Blacks and other communities and everything that happened last year that led up to BLM and the movement, it's easy for us to try to find things that stop the hurt right now. But stopping the hurt right now, you put a band-aid on it, the scar is still there. And by the way, nothing that stops it from you getting hurt again. So our work is really, and I really try to work with companies and collaborators that are very interested in trying to make more sustainable change. I use this quote when I've been talking to companies or I make a request and I say, because I always get asked, how will we know you're done with your work? And I said, I'll never be done. My only hope in life is that I can close the gap a little bit and make it better in my lifetime. I will never be able to take away racism. For anyone in the audience, I want to see the study that actually says and gives me a date. Because if you can give me that, Lisa, and get NYU to create that, that will give me the North Star. I want that North
You
Star.
and I both. You and I both.
Our North Star. But somehow our mindset, right? Because we're a kind of a fast consumer culture, we want to get it fixed.
That's right.
And we want it fixed yesterday. I think that is really important mindset to say we want to get it fixed totally. But actually to drive change, what's happening to Asian Americans has evolved over a few 100-year history. What happens to African Americans is over a 400 plus year history. So we don't change it in 4 months or years. But I hope that in my lifetime, I can narrow it. I can make it better. And when I'm a great grandmother, I want to be able to tell my great grandchildren that I made it a better place. And that was my contribution. And so that is kind of the aspiration I try to impart of art in my membership, but also with the companies we work for. But that's a hard concept, right? Because we are back to what you mentioned about goals, right? Companies are measured by short-term returns. CEOs are measured that way because they have a relatively short cycle in their companies. So I try to look at it, make change beyond, your company or at one place in time, but look at it over a longer journey that you can be a part of and continue that work, right? Continue that work beyond whatever is your current platform today.
That is absolutely, and I have to say the Ascend's 5-point plan for the COVID action response has just been amazing, and the partnership that you talked about with the other organizations. And so I just want to tell our audience, please, we've dropped it in the chat, so please take a look at that and take a look at the Stop Asian Hate as well. So please avail yourself of these resources. We've been promoting your resources also on our website. So
I appreciate that.
So So next, I want to just talk a little bit about how you maintain your agility as a leader and what specific skills you're tapping into. And particularly because we have a lot of emerging leaders, right? And we have a lot of leaders who they've just been there's been a lot of disruption. We have people who haven't been able to be on campus, etc. So could you tell us a little bit about some of the new ways that you or opportunities that you found during COVID, new ways of working and engaging, especially during this time? And I happen to know that you're able to pivot and do a number of things. So you can help some of our emerging leaders figure out how they can do that too.
Yeah, I love some of the words you said. So I coined a term with our members called GRIT, but it's an acronym. So I'll share that concept and people can think about this of what it means. So G stands for being generous. So when COVID first came on, we really put to challenge our members to be generous with their time and talents, right? We were all locked up, but we have a lot of insights, all of us, right? Whether we're skilled in technology or we know analytics or there's so many skills. So I really ask people to be really generous. So this concept of being resilient. I think what COVID has taught us that, we're pretty resilient as humans across the globe. When you think about it, how quickly we shift. It was painful. It still is painful, but we're pretty resilient, right? But I think a confidence in yourself that you can be resilient and that resiliency leads to this positiveness of can do is so important. Mindset, right? Resilience is a mindset, right? It's about a mindset. Third is being impactful. So what I know is one of the things near and dear to both our hearts, right? Really challenging ourselves. How can you be really impactful? And again, it doesn't have to be big things to be impactful.
That's right.
And being impactful could be as simple as deciding to use your time to volunteer to do something that impacted and touch one person's life. Because if you can touch that one person's life, that one person will then be able to touch another person's life. So I'm a strong believer in that. And this concept of together, you have NYU together, I have Ascend together as our mantra, right? So this concept of that we're not in this alone. And as a society and as a people, how do you build coalitions and collaborations and reach across the aisle? You hear that term, right? Quite heavily. So when I put that in action with Ascend in particular, we were an organization similar to what universities had to deal with, but probably with less resources. We had to go from all of our chapters doing live programs, big conventions, completely live to 100% virtual with a relatively modest, right, headquarters staff to do this in embracing technology. And we went into, it wasn't a crisis mode, but what we ended up doing was we came together as a volunteer team because much of what Ascend does is we engage our volunteer network.
Mhm.
And we were like, it's as if we were going to war with COVID. We met every week and we still meet every week as a leadership team to share and talk about what are we going to do. And also we learn to very quickly do some things, even though it's not perfect.
Mhm.
And that is also perfect is sometimes the death of all of us, right? All of us want to be
Could you say
perfect. I
that
want
again
to
for
be
some of our
perfect.
students out there?
I want to be perfect. And by the way, if you are an API, that perfect desire, which sometimes in the way we're raised, is really not the most healthy thing for us because we will never be perfect.
No,
Because being perfect means you're measuring to some idealism, and
that's
that
right.
idealism is probably not achievable. Okay, so, or believe, or maybe another way to look at it, we are all perfect in our own way. And
We
that own
are.
way is
And we
okay.
also learn along the way. We're
And
learning
learn
together.
along the way. Exactly. Right after we had this body of work for COVID and for the 5-point action agenda. So we've been doing a lot of work around race, leveraging technology, lots of convenings. Right after the Atlanta spa shootings, I put a challenge to our team. I said, we need to be out front on this issue. We need to create a safe space conversation for our members. And literally in 3 days, our team stood up an Ascend Together forum where we had almost 2,000 people attend. And we conducted this open conversation with an open line for 2,000 people. The team was freaking out about how are we going to do that? What if we have Zoom bombers on there? And what if we're going to have people that don't like our agenda? I said, we'll deal with it then. And it was probably, when I think about our recent work, one of the most impactful pieces of work. And by the way, because we did it so early, what happened was our members that sat in companies, they went and replicated versions of that and have still continued to replicate that in their companies to create these safe space conversations for us to talk about how these hate crimes were impacting us, not only at home, but how it was impacting us in work. So the point of that is this need to be agile, not always seek for everything perfect and right before we put it out there. I think it's very consistent with being an entrepreneur and innovating, right? You have to be okay with that. And then you have to be confident that you have enough support and goodwill built that people will forgive you if it's not exactly right. If I have a technology problem and I can't get it exactly right, it's okay. And that's a hard thing, right? Because we get graded, we're used to getting graded and check all the boxes and all of that.
That's exactly right. It's so, and exactly, and everybody wants the A plus plus, right? But we have to, some of us, we have to learn. And so, and learning is such a great thing. And we emphasize this as I was reading your bio, but I think you emphasized this as you were just talking as well. It's also about curiosity, right? And being curious as you go along. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. Again, a terrific response. And so, and so one of the other questions that I have here is it's around innovation, and you just spoke a little bit about innovation, and you've been speaking about different types of innovation and also the innovation across your career. So as we prepare for our future, and one of the things that we've been talking a lot about, and you even heard me say this in my remarks, is people keep saying it's the new normal. And I've had this new phrase that I've been using, which is called the new different. And I'm hoping that we don't go back to the old normal because it wasn't so great in some instances, right? And so maybe we can do some things a little bit differently. But in that way, talk to us a little bit about the role of innovation in business, right? And across sectors, and maybe even with some of the other organizations. You brought up the United Way and the Commonwealth Club, but talk to me a little bit about innovation. And as I already said, NYU, we double down on innovation. So
I think I do believe large organizations like NYU and large companies can innovate. There's this perception they have to put everything so small to innovate, right? But I do believe, and there's a misperception because ultimately innovation, I believe, comes from creating an environment where a set of people with natural curiosity that want to do better and make change can share their ideas and move it forward, right? And also innovation doesn't have to be new. Somehow we always think of innovation, it has to be new. Innovation can be as something as just better and improved, right? So if you think about that, of making it better, and better could mean just making it more efficiently.
right.
To me, that's innovation, right? It could be the same product or the same idea, but you're actually getting it to market differently.
Everyone thinks they have to have the breakthrough innovation, but there's
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have to be that, right? And so when you think about your role, I believe also most people have actually the skill to innovate. We might call it something different, right? And I never saw that. So you mentioned our shared passion for cooking, right? I'm not as good a gardener as you, Lisa. So that's why my new Victorian has no gardening spots. Everything's in a pot as it relates to all green around the property. But I am this innovative cook because I never cook with recipes.
Yes.
So I will just constantly and my dinner guests always laugh because they say, oh, that was really good. Give me the recipe. I said, nope, you better enjoy it now because next time it's not going to taste the same because I'm going to innovate and transform it differently. But something as simple, right? And I use that because I think innovating is liberating yourself
Yes.
from a recipe, right? So if you don't
I'm
force
gonna have to
yourself to
steal that
try
one.
to,
That's exactly right.
right? You like that one? Fly kind of speaker, right? I don't speak from a script. I have to speak from my heart right now, what I'm feeling in this moment. And so yeah, if you liberate yourself from always needing to follow a recipe, you will actually naturally innovate, right? Whether that is you just and having a little confidence that, hey, I always have confidence. I know my food will always be edible. I've never created something that wasn't edible, right? As long as you start with some good things, good ingredients, it will be edible. Right?
You start with the basic good ingredients. That's right.
Exactly. Some good ingredients and a little bit of a, good palate, you're good, right? It doesn't have to be expensive ingredients. It just has to be solid, good ingredients. So if you liberate yourself from saying, I have to live by a formula and
That
I
is
have to
just
exactly follow this roadmap, you will innovate. Whatever it is you want to innovate in, whether it's cooking, whether it's creating a product, whether it's sex. That's my simple view on innovation.
I have to say, first of all, identifying the different types of innovation, I think is so key because you're exactly right. Everybody thinks they have to, like you said with change, like break open the room. And that's not,
Right.
we all are not going to do that. And liberate yourself from the recipe. That is
You
just
like that one?
brilliant.
Good.
I like that
I'm
one a
going to
lot.
charge you for that one, Lisa.
I'm going to have to quote you on that one for sure.
Good, good.
Uh, so so one of the things, and I think this is important because one of the things that we try to underscore at NYU is cross sector and cross kind of work that people do across different areas. And so we've talked about Ascend, United Way, Commonwealth Club. We've talked about Deloitte, but one of the things you have mentioned is your love of the building. I talked about this in your bio, public art. And as an institution that we are deeply immersed in the arts, as you know, and even in our makerspace, we brought together Tisch School of the Arts with the business school, right, and the engineering school, et cetera. So tell us a little bit about your favorites. Tell us a little bit about public art and you.
Yeah, maybe I'll talk a bit about even my own public art journey.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah.
I am not what I would consider um, a developed artist. I've never taken a fine arts class. Yet I do have curiosity, as you know now. I don't live with the recipe, and I like to constantly learn and challenge myself. So my story actually of how I even became so enamored by public art is that a few years ago I went to my first Burning Man.
Oh, yeah.
And so, for people that may understand Burning Man, it's not a festival, but one of the anchors of Burning Man is people stand up and create art and put it in the desert.
That's right.
So, it has a ton of challenges related to that, right? How do you build it? How do you install it? How do you have it stand up to basically the intensity of being in the hot desert sun for a week? And how do you bring it back home without leaving any trace of that art in the desert and letting the desert go back to its natural state? So I went to my first Burning Man a few years ago, and it was an okay experience. But then what was really captivated me was the art there. So the second year, I decided to create my own public art. And I've never created a big art piece in my life. Yeah, literally, I think maybe when I make that pottery plate, it looks like okay, and you can put a little appetizer on it, but definitely am not an artist. But I think the fact that I was liberated to use my creative side, and then I saw how people responded to the art piece. So I made a piece called Love's Hug, and I'm on camera, but if I were off camera, you would see that that's my screensaver. And it was a communal piece that is shaped in a heart that gets lit up and cast shadow on the ground. But it was a piece. If you've ever, for people that have been to Burning Man, it's a very sometimes it's a very chaotic place because there's a lot of people, there's a lot of music, there's a lot of noise. And I wanted this really safe, quiet space that engulfed people where someone can sit there and reflect. And now that I think about it, and that led me on a journey to really appreciate and admire public art. I don't have to have a favorite place, but if I see public art, I will always stop and ponder on it and tap into what I'm feeling from it. And I think that is the value of public art. The fact that it is so accessible,
Yes.
that all of us can connect with it, whether it's a special bench, whether it's a massive big structure like we know from famous artists that's all around campus and in New York. It is something for everyone. And back to the point of access, that is what I like about public art. You can be rich, poor, you can be yellow, black, white. Everyone has access to it as long as you're there. And that is what I most appreciate about public art. It's because of that. And it's to be enjoyed by many,
It
right?
is. It is.
And it's to be
That's
enjoyed by many.
It is indeed. And that pointing to access and equity is so important. You're exactly right. Because public art uh, uh, is more accessible often when we think about museum cultures and things like that.
Right.
And thanks for sharing your creative journey. I think this is so important because so many people, right, especially in an artist community like ours, we have lots of people who are like, I'm not an artist because I can't do X. And I think that's important to really think about how we can all be creative and express that creativity in various ways. I
And
took some.
it's been very enriching for me to have that as an element. And in fact, even though Burning Man did not happen last year and may or may not happen this year, what it allowed me to do was form a team
Mhm.
outside of the workplace, a whole different kind of team. And I had to think about a team that had different skills, right? Because I'm not one that even knew how to work with wood, and my art piece was wood based. So I had to kind of create a team, tapping into friends and each leveraging our strengths to create that art piece. And I think that a lot of public art tends to be big pieces. And I think there's opportunities actually to have people come together and create art together, right? It brings it together in multiple ways.
Oh, terrific. So I have my next question is really about mentorship. And it's a twofold question. One is about your mentors, right? What kind of mentors you had along the way, how that has worked, and then how yourself as a mentor, right? Talk to us a little bit about how you work with mentees, thinking about that, and sponsorship, because a lot of our people out there, of course, know the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. I know you know the difference, so talk to us a little bit about that too.
Well, there's a few ways. I've been fortunate, but I could have definitely benefited from even more mentorship throughout my career. And I still have mentors actually now in my life. So I think it's a life journey of having and finding mentors. I do believe it's important to have mentors that, if you want to say, look like yourself, but also are completely different from you, right? Whether they're different from you because of their political orientation or gender orientation or the ethnic orientation, right? Because that is how we learn. Because of that difference, your mentor is seeing light differently and how they process and experience you, you get a different kind of feedback. But it is very important to have mentors that are like you because there is something very powerful about a shared experience that you have with your mentor. So I think it's very important to have the combination of the two in our in your mentor circles. I have a couple of views on mentoring in terms of I always wait for the mentees to be proactive around their work. I think the mentees have to do the heavy lift for the work as it relates to the relationship. And also, I expect my mentees to give me something too. And it's not so much that they're giving me something because I want something, but I want them adapted to the mindset that they should give as much as they receive. So that is something very important to me in my mentor mentee relationships. And sponsorship, as you mentioned, Lisa, is a whole different aspect of the relationship, right? Sponsorship tends to happen more when someone really is a sponsorship relationship would be more public, right? So whether you are sponsoring someone in the workplace or you are endorsing someone. And so those relationships also have to be two ways. I think, especially students, I think students, everyone wants that big CEO or a very titled person to be their mentor. But I would say actually sometimes the best mentors are people that actually are not that far away from you in terms of your career or your life, because they actually just had that experience a few years ago, right? And organizations and other things are evolving over time. So my counsel is you don't need, if you're an NYU student, you actually don't need a CEO as your mentor at this stage in life. It's good to have them if you have access to them, but don't discount someone that's just, a recent alumni from the university who actually just went through what you're going through. And that's one of the things I always coach people when they're wanting to have a mentor. I'm not sure, they need someone that has a 20-year career gap between where they are, right? Because you're just kind of thinking, what do I need to do either to get to the next job, or, how do I deal with this one issue because I'm new to the company or new to the business. So you don't need to shoot so high sometimes to say that a person is a great mentor.
I think that is just absolutely right. And we know that peer mentorship, right? And that sort of cohort mentorship can be so helpful. And you're exactly right. To navigate where you are, sometimes you need someone who's been there a little more
Closer.
recently, because things
Right.
shift. Things shift across time. What I navigated 20 years ago might not be what people are navigating. So thank you for that.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So I'm going to turn to some questions from our audience right now. And thank you, Amanda. Amanda Schick, thank you for your question. So one of the questions here is, could you provide some examples of what you would consider sustainable change? And I know you talked a little bit about that, but maybe a few more examples of sustainable change that companies can enact.
Couple things. One, there's been a question I get asked, and maybe Lisa, you've been studying this or know this, on things like, does diversity training work,
Yeah.
right? Because if it worked, why are we not fixing all of these advancement issues? My answer about something like that as training is actually, I'm a big fan of diversity training. I think they have a place, but a sustainable change a company can make is really evaluate, was your diversity training set up to teach people to fit an organization? Meaning you're just trying to get someone to fit the cultural norm of a company? Or is it set up as a company to use what you learn from your employees to evolve the company and the company culture, right? The reason I believe that if diversity training maybe hasn't has as big of an impact is largely it's been driving to have someone fit something versus driving true change. So an example of sustainable change would be, okay, companies really looking at changing culture as a result, right, of what they're hearing from their employees. It's not the other way around,
That's right.
right? Because we're not going to fit nicely in a box because we're too different to fit too nicely in a
We've
box,
been
right?
liberated.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So that's an example of what a company can do to make really sustainable change, but also see it over time. There's a lot of companies or even individuals as humans, we tend to follow news cycles, right? So we're chasing whatever is hot right now, whatever is popular, whatever is that. But as you and I talked about earlier, the hard work is actually figuring out how to focus on something and do it over a period of time, right? And not let the company and not let yourself get distracted from the belief and understanding that that's real hard work. So companies that take a bit of a longer term focus and also reward their employees and the community for making longer term impact is what's important. We've taken on Ascend the Mandate, and we're just launching a big impact fund where we're asking companies to support us philanthropically to move the needle on the model minority myth. Back to the earlier conversation, the declaration is not for me to get rid of it because I won't. But I know that if I don't start moving the needle more on that, we won't get to redirect the conversation, right, of APIs
Mhm.
and people of diverse backgrounds in the workplace and to help build an inclusive workplace. So to me, that's sustainable change, right? Being able to recognize that you have to do the really hard work and being able to be comfortable to tackle that, even though we don't know what the end game is on it.
Right. I mean, we don't know what the end game is, but transformation, often we don't know what the end game is. And I really appreciate you talking
Right.
about organizational culture and shifting that culture, because I think that's so crucial. Thank you again, Amanda, for your question. So the next question comes from Mariana Lima. Um, how do you see the future of education? Oh, okay. Okay. You don't have to apologize for your typing or the way you phrase your question, by the way. So this question is about the future of education and inclusive culture. And it's also part of what the question is asking is, do you believe that in a world of collaboration, that as we collaborate more, that we can change, right, the differential kind of prejudices that we see and lead toward more inclusive culture? So, and what do you see, I think, is the role of the future of education, not just current education, but the future?
I think this global piece that we've talked about, and again, NYU is such a leader in that just by nature of being truly a global university. And of all the universities I'm aware of, you are one of the most global, both in terms of your physical campuses and how you create your community. That is such an important step, right? What we are learning is these issues are not all country specific issues.
Right.
So for example, we talk about the Asian hate issues as if it's just an American US society issue. But actually, the fact of the matter, even though they may be different shades of it, the same thing is happening in other English speaking countries. Canada, UK, Australia, you name some of these countries, right? If you look at the Black experience, same similar things, right, that happen. So I strongly believe that important to look at it from a geographical difference, but ultimately we have to look at it globally. And by the way, the mobility of the workforce is so high in the future, right? People go to school somewhere, they work somewhere for a few years, then they move somewhere else, or then they get, they may decide to have children and raise families somewhere else. So we're all going to be quite mobile in our experiences. And these issues really cross country or national lines. And a place like NYU plays such an important role to have people develop a very global mindset very early on in your adult lives and also in your graduate programs. And really having that global mindset is one of the first steps, right, to making change.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Um, so my next question is around building a team. So you talked about, you referenced building a team, both at Ascend and then you talked about other teams. Tell us, how do you build a team? How do you go about that? How do you think about building a team? And have there been changes since your early days to now in terms of how you think about building teams?
Um, Changes. I'm trying to think in my early days compared to now. I think one is I always look for and try to understand what is I call the superpower of the individual, right? Because I do believe we don't all have the same superpowers.
That's right. That's right.
And so, really appreciating understanding what is the superpower and then really trying to align that superpower with what is the role and the job that best leverages that to me is the first thing, right? I
Mhm.
also look at team chemistry because that's very important. Big teams, small teams, it's still a set of people working together, sometimes enabled by some technology, but largely it's still people working together, being able to communicate effectively with each other. So that's a second aspect. I also evaluate whether the team members are people with an inclusive mindset. Is the team member a person that can actually work with a wide range of people and are able to appreciate our differences and also harness the power from each other. And so those are three very important criteria. And you notice I didn't say technical competency in any of that, right?
Oh,
'Cause
that's
I'm
great.
assuming I'm assuming people will have some basis of technical competency. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in these organizations, right? You wouldn't have been to NYU. So it's about this working together, being able to collaborate and communicate, and then having different strengths, right? And leveraging those strengths. To me, that's most important to building a team. And then the other thing that we talk about, which is subtle, is I really look for and try to tap into people with we use this term EQ, right? Having an ability to understand other people, but also create empathy and pathways of how you connect with each other, to me is a very important aspect for my team members and the type of culture I want to create, right? That I create in each of my teams.
So well said. And I love that part about the superpower, and empathy, as we've seen, is just so crucial. Even the people who've been leading during COVID, we've seen the more successful leaders, right? So my next, I'm going to have probably, I may have time for, may hopefully two questions, but one question here. And it's because we use it so much and so many people do. And it's the 6 C's of inclusive leadership from Deloitte. And so, as you know, it's everywhere. Lots of diversity officers use it,
Yeah.
etc. But I'd really just like to hear a little bit more about what inclusive leadership means to you, right? You don't have to, the 6 C's are out there, et cetera. But what do you, when you're thinking about inclusive leadership, given what you've just said, even about creating a team, right? And getting different, et cetera, different people, right? With different assets, different superpowers. So talk to us a little bit about that idea of inclusive leadership.
So the concept that how I internalize it is that not only the criteria I just mentioned, but recognizing that we all have different leadership and communication styles. You and I are clearly a little bit more extroverted, as an example, right? And we're more than comfortable to be here and have this conversation, but not everyone is. And that's okay. So I don't force everyone to look like me or act like me. And so to me, inclusive leadership means that, back to what I said about diversity training, right? I'm not trying to force someone into my model of engagement. I'm trying to create a team where the model of engagement respects how we each communicate differently. There's a concept of being a quiet leader, and quiet leaders are equally impactful. And that's really the conversation I want, is to change our view of what a strong leader looks like. That it is not just one model of strong leadership, but there may be multiple views of what a strong leader looks like. And I think that's very important, especially when you look at a global workforce, because each of us are, depending on how our countries of origin is, how we grew up, the amount of access we have, we actually end up showing up differently in the workplace. So it's important for us and our teams to recognize and respect that.
All right. Well, I have probably, I think this is probably going to be my final question. I can't believe the time has gone by so quickly. So, one of the underlying principles here in global inclusion is joy. Because as you said before, as we talked about before, right, we can burn out in this work. There are lots of pressures, the leadership trying to break the glass ceiling, 8 panes, 5 panes, 3 panes, whatever it is, right? So can you talk to us a little bit about what brings you joy? What sustains you in the sort of, besides the public art, of course. So tell us a little bit about joy for you.
So joy for me comes in so many ways. I'm generally a very happy person. Not much gets me down. And I think it's because the root of that is I come from an immigrant parents who immigrated to the US with nothing, right? So I always have a lot of gratitude, and I find strength in that, what they were able to do in terms of putting 2 kids through college who then have been able to, in our own way, achieve the American dream. So I'm always grounded in that appreciation. But joy comes from family, food, and lots of fun and laughter in my life. So those are just three pretty basic things. And of course, I'm sharing the food with my friends and all my friends, and having interesting friends and diverse friends is what fuels me all the time.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. I'm sure that our audience members and our students, and of course the people who are going to watch this in our asynchronous in our other camp from our other campuses. So again, thank you so much, Anna, for being with us. I hope everyone out there has enjoyed this evening's program, or this morning or this afternoon's program, wherever you are. Again, this is the Global Scholars and Innovators Initiative, offered by the Office of Global Inclusion. Thank you to our partners again, particularly the Women's Leadership Forum, and of course, our partners in Shanghai. We hope that everyone out there continues to take very good care. These continue to be extremely challenging times. Please also know that Ascend has lots of resources. We have shared some of those on our OGI website, but we hope that you will also go to the Ascend website. We've dropped some of that information into the chat. Avail yourself of the resources, but also for our students, there's some wonderful programs and activities. And of course, you can get involved there as well. Lastly, I would like to thank everyone from the institution who has continued to work with Ascend. As Anna mentioned, we have a lot of partners out there. I'm not going to start to name them all, because then I'll forget someone and I'll feel embarrassed later. But I'll just say this: thank you to our alums. Thank you to the people who are currently on the NYU staff, and you know who you are, and we continue to meet with you. So thank you for the partnership. And then finally, of course, thank you to my team. Thank you to the Office of Global Inclusion. I can't even remember the name of my own office. Oh my goodness. Diversity, Inclusion, and Strategic Innovation. Thank you to everyone who's been working behind the scenes. And we hope, again, everyone, please take good care of yourselves, your loved ones, your colleagues, get the resources, use the education. We are a learning institution. Be curious, innovate, and as part of our work here, it's about action and sustainability. So remember that. Take action, make it sustainable, and of course, check out the resources that we have on our website as well. Thank you again, everyone, and have a terrific night. And thank you, Anna.
Thank you.